Okay, excellent. Good evening, everybody. My name is Hugo Ferreira. I'm a second year medical student at UCL, and I'm also a committee member of the MedTech Society. Today, I really hope that you've enjoyed the past talks of our series so far. And today's our 9th talk, and I'm delighted to introduce Mr. Vivek Natarajan. He is an AI and healthcare researcher at Google AI, which was formerly known as Facebook AI. He works in translating AI technologies to create positive clinical impact and health outcomes. He's recently developed a deep learning system for differential diagnosis of skin diseases, which I'm very much looking forward to hear about. And yeah, may I just remind you that the chat has been disabled for today. But if you do have any questions, please do use the Q&A function below and upvote any questions that you find interesting. I'll now hand it over to Vivek.
Thanks so much for the warm introduction, Hugo. Just a quick clarification. I work at Google AI now, but previously used to work at Facebook AI, which is a completely different team and company. But yeah, just give me a moment. And I hope you all can see my slides.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you.
Okay, so maybe let's get started. And if I'm talking too fast, please let me know, because that's something that people raise all the time. So, but other than that, yeah, I think my talk was tentatively titled Challenges of Deploying Medical Imaging AI at Scale, but I thought let's be a little bit more positive. We all need that a little bit in 2021. So just reword it a little bit. And it's more about building better medical imaging AI for clinical deployment at scale. So the content is basically the same, but just changing the title. And so, yeah, I just want to start off by giving you a brief history of AI in medical imaging. As you all know, like maybe in the last decade or so, deep learning has like completely revolutionized AI, especially in computer vision. And medical imaging is one of these subfields of computer vision, which where there's a huge potential for AI to have impact, right? Because there's been so much progress, and if we can apply it to medical imaging tasks, then we can like help patients all over the world. And so there's been a lot of excitement. A lot of smart researchers around the world have been looking into this and trying to build models in this particular space, and it's no different at Google. And I think there's a very rich history over here, and specifically we have like 7 or 8 different, like I would call them as seminal papers at Google, starting off with the diabetic retinopathy one, which was done in 2016, where the task is to detect like different grades of diabetic retinopathy from fundus images. And then we had like a lot more papers over the years, all super impactful. And so as you can see, like these like the tasks that we have worked on, they span the full continuum of medical imaging. Like you have 2D images in the top row, and then you have like 3 volumetric images in the bottom row. And then like if you look at the bottom right, you see pathology images, which are these giant gigapixel slides. Yeah, so you can see that all these modalities are very different, but we've still found that like AI can work very well in all these cases. So that's a huge plus for us. And then the second thing is, as you can see, like the way in which you train models, the amount of information that you give, the views that you give to the model also change quite a lot. So on the in the first column, we have these single views, like essentially just one view of your left or right eye for the fundus images or for the OCT images. And then you increase your field of views or the number of instances that the model has access to as you move gradually to the right with, like, for example, in the skin disease classification paper that we had in 2019 in Nature Medicine, we had like up to 6 images of your given skin condition that was passed on to the model. So yeah, so what I just want to convey over here is like medical imaging is a very broad subfield, and it's quite incredible that like AI, I mean, with AI and with deep learning and computer vision, we have been able to like build these models across a lot of variety of tasks. So that's kind of very promising over here. And undoubtedly, all of this research has like gotten a lot of visibility in the research community. For example, the diabetic retinopathy detection from fundus images, the paper was picked as one of the top 10 JAMA articles of the decade. And then the papers that Google had on AI to like detect breast cancers from mammograms, and then lung cancer from lung CD images, they all got picked up by mainstream media like the New York Times and I think even the Guardian and stuff like that. So there's a lot of visibility, of course, in this space. And there's also huge potential, right? And there was this recent article in the New York Times where like they showed how there's this app from a startup called Cure, which is using like mobile phones to like deploy AI models that can diagnose TB, and TB is a pretty big killer in like places like India, right? And so like if we get this right and if we deploy it at scale, there's obviously going to be a huge impact, and especially in the developing world. But so yeah, so there's all this excitement. We see like these papers almost like every other week where researchers around the world claim to have like built an amazing deep learning model. So that begs the question, right? I think like are we done? Is there more to do over here? And I guess the answer is pretty obvious, like in the sense that we have all these nice research papers, which is all getting picked up by the mainstream media. But if you look around us, right, there's no real deployment of AI in clinics in healthcare settings. So, and that is best illustrated by this tweet from Dr. Eric Topol, who's going to be a part of the series, I guess, tomorrow. And it's an old one. I think it's like from February 2020. But I guess not much has changed over the last year as well, given the situation COVID. There's been only like a handful of randomized control trials of AI in medicine to date, and all of them were in China. So we still, so like in terms of like evaluating these models in real world clinical settings, there's still a long way to go. And after that follows regulation, and after that follows like deployment, right? So, and all these things like generally take years, and there's no like shortcutting. And then there's this other aspect, right? I think like you can build these amazing models that work well when you're like in your research labs like at Google or Facebook or whatever. But then when you deploy them in real world hospitals or in clinics and like ask like clinicians or even your end users to use them, you realize that the model performance in your data sets does not necessarily translate to real world impact. And so there's this nice paper from some of my colleagues at Google who deployed this deep learning system for diabetic retinopathy in clinics in Thailand. And they did a bunch of interviews with doctors and nurses and clinicians and also patients to understand how the model's being used. And they found out that like, yeah, it's non-trivial to like basically translate your amazing deep learning models to clinical impact. It depends on a lot of different socio environmental factors. So yeah, I would definitely go and ask you to encourage you to like maybe go and read this paper. It has a lot more details. It's like really well done. And then I think I just mentioned this. And then there's this more recent paper. I think this is probably just a couple of weeks old. From Perry Wilson's group, which came out in BMJ, and which basically had this multi-center randomized control trial regarding electronic health records for acute kidney injury. And what they basically found was the alerts which are driven by AI did not improve performance, and the results were highly heterogeneous across these different hospital centers. And so what this basically points or it tells us is that if we don't do this correctly, right, if we don't like consider all the factors in terms of deploying all the clinical factors, and like there's a very big set of things that we need to consider to be able to like really achieve clinical impact at scale. And if we don't consider all of them, what this could end up happening is that we have like a very expensive system, but also very like an ineffective intervention when we are using these AI alerts or these diagnosis models basically. And this could potentially even be harmful because what we have is like an already overburdened healthcare system, and like some of these technologies could like easily lead to like overdiagnosis and like harmful treatment, et cetera, et cetera. So yeah, we need to like basically put in a lot of thought to get this right. And so as I said, I think all this is a long way of saying that, yeah, there's been a lot of progress on the research front. some amazing papers written, lots of press, lots of visibility in the mainstream media, but in terms of like really deploying it at scale, there's still a long way to go. And so this asks, and so like the question is like how do we like really make AI useful for patients, right? And so I believe there are maybe roughly 4 things, and I'm just going to briefly touch on it over here. And I think these are, I think we need to like firstly really understand clinician needs really well, and we need to like build AI tools that really enable better clinician AI collaboration. And for AI to like really drive real world patient impact, we need literally clinician AI symbiosis. I think there's been talk about like AI replacing radiologists and stuff like that. I think that's fancy talk. That's probably not going to happen. I think it like what will instead end up happening is we'll have these models that are going to just ease clinician workloads and make their lives easier, and this will in turn like enable clinicians to maybe focus more on the actual patients and understanding their needs and their journeys and everything. And so overall, I feel like like if we go in this direction and like build our tools to ensure that like like there's optimal clinical AI collaboration, then there's a very good chance for real world patient impact. And just building on top of this, I think we need to like really understand clinical workflows and provide very specific, specialized actionable insights. And if you fail to do that, as the BMJ AKI alerts paper showed, there's this real risk of like overdiagnosis or even wrongful diagnosis and potential harm to patients. So we need to be very careful, and we need to, so all this really calls for like, like deep multidisciplinary teams who are developing AI models to be deployed in clinics. And so it's not just going to be technologists or AI researchers, right? It's going to be like clinical experts also. And so that's how my team at Google is. Like we have maybe 50% engineers and researchers, and then there's this other half which is fully made of clinical experts from all around the world. And so that really helps us like put a lot of thought into the models that we are building and considering the clinical workflows in which we are like deploying these models and the environments as well. So and in general, I think without like a multidisciplinary team, we are not going to be able to have success over here. And then the third important piece over here is really understanding patient needs and journey, right? I think like we need to understand what they want, what sort of information that they want, and then build tools and AI models for those specific purposes. And so really, it's not just like us building AI models, it's also considering clinicians, and it's also considering patients, and like really deeply understanding them before we are going to be able to make progress over here. And I guess this builds on top of this. It's like we also need to understand the health economic system, equity, and other fairness considerations. And so like if we put all these 4 things together, I think we'll be able to like quickly make progress over here. But as I said, I'm not the biggest expert in this space. I think there are other folks who are part of this series, like Dr. Pearse, Keane, or Dr. Eric Topol, who can maybe tell you a lot more about these things in detail. And so this is not really, I mean, all these are extremely important, but this is not really the focus of this talk. And so this talk is really a little bit more technical. And so, and what I really want to maybe ask the question and be able to answer at the end of this talk is, are AI models really ready for clinical deployment at scale? And that's the question we ask ourselves at Google in our team. And then like, and if not, then when we need to understand what are the limitations and challenges, and then work towards addressing them. And so it's basically, so this talk is about like, so like what I want to tell you is that I think there are still fundamentally issues that we need to address and solve in the AI field itself, without considering the overall environment or the clinical workflows or the hospitals and everything that we have. Just within the AI field itself, I think there's a lot more to be done to make our models ready for real-world clinical deployment at scale. And so this is, and so like, so the next set of slides, there's going to be a little bit more of a change of focus, and so it's going to be a little bit more technical. I'm going to like basically tell you about like what we think are maybe the limitations, or what are maybe things that we need to do to be able to like make AI models really be able to be like deployed at scale in real world hospitals, and like give you like an overview of like the sort of things that we have been doing at Google on this front over the last year and a half, basically. And so, as I said, several challenges remain to be addressed before we can like really safely and reliably deploy. And And if you're able to do it, then we'll be able to really have AI at scale in clinics and hospitals. And I think that's the goal, because we know that if we get this right, there's a lot of potential for positively impacting patients and improving quality of life overall. And so that's really the goal. I think we want to have AI ubiquitous because we really believe in this technology. And so it's all about accelerating that future in many ways. And just one other quick thing is, while the next set of slides are going to be maybe talking a lot about medical imaging AI, but I feel like the stuffs that we talk about are super general and can be applied to other fields as well, like whether you're working on modeling EHR records or any other field, for example. So yeah, the lessons are broadly applicable in general. So yeah, switching tracks. So I think now the goal is okay, how do we build better AI for clinical deployment at scale? And so if you were to ask me, what are maybe some of the limitations of AI, and especially in medical imaging right now, I would maybe point out four things. One is, I think the models that we have today are maybe not very data efficient. So we train these models by this process called supervised learning, where we throw large data sets which are expertly annotated, and so yeah, all these things are expensive, which I'll go into a little bit later. But what we really want is our models to be really be data efficient and be able to learn from small amounts of data. Then the second aspect is generalizability, right? I think you want your model to be able to perform robustly under different kinds of distribution shifts, and be able to generalize to new populations. Like, for example, when you train on when you deploy a model in a new hospital, or when it encounters new patient populations, or when the prevalence of diseases change, you still want your model to be robust and perform really well in those settings. And then the third aspect is safety, right? I think models are always going to be trained on maybe large data sets, but always finite data. So there's always going to be stuff the model encounters that it may not have seen before. So it's important that the models are able to be able to communicate to us or whoever is involved in the loop, right? Whether it's a clinician or the consumer, that okay, this is a setting that I haven't seen before, and I don't know what the right answer is, and maybe you should reach out to an expert to better understand this. So models being able to call out when they don't know something is also very important to be able to safely deploy these models at scale. And lastly, I think the other probably the most important aspect is fairness. There's a lot of inequity in healthcare systems around the world right now, and it's important that when we deploy these AI models, they don't make the problem worse. And we really want our models to be unbiased and perform equally across different subgroups and so on and so forth. So in the next set of slides, I think I'm going to be talking about specific things that we are doing at Google right now to address these different challenges, and I think these in turn will make our models better and really enable them to be deployed at scale in real world clinics and hospitals, and really positively impact patients. And so yeah, the first part is data efficiency, and so yeah, I briefly mentioned this before, but so if you were to ask a question, why do you need our AI models to be data efficient? I mean, the first thing is it's super expensive, right? I think labels in general, for any machine learning problem, you maybe go to Amazon Mechanical Turk to get your labels. But specifically in healthcare, right? You depend on expert clinicians to get these golden quality data labels, and this costs a lot of money. Clinicians are not cheap, as you all maybe know. And then the second thing is it's also super time consuming, and sorry for the bad animation over there, but I hope some of you picked up what I meant over there. But yeah, so these are real issues, how expensive it is and how time consuming it is. And this in turn maybe makes it it stretches out the timeline for us to be able to deploy at scale, right? Because I think if you need months or maybe years to get your data sets cleaned and ready and be really large enough for your models to really learn well, and that's going to basically stretch out the timeline before which are able to deploy. And so what we want is our models to be really data efficient and be able to learn very well from small amounts of data, possibly an order of magnitude less than what we have before. And so, and then the other aspect is there are plenty of diseases which are rare or new, right? I think like some of the more cancerous skin conditions are super rare, like they're not very prevalent, and there are like many eye conditions as well. And then like there are always these new diseases that pop up from time to time, like who knew what COVID was maybe like a year or so back, and this is something. So there's always going to be rare, like a very small number of examples for some of these rare diseases that we have. And then the other aspect is we're always going to have subgroups where we don't have enough population. And so a good example for this is in a lot of the data sets for which we are developing these skin condition classification models, like there's not enough data belonging to type 1 Fitzpatrick skin or type 5 or type 6 Fitzpatrick skin. And the worst part is like the diseases don't manifest in the same way on these different skin types. They look very different. The same condition can look very different on type 3 versus type 6 skin. And similarly, in mammography, you have if you're going like there's this varying notion of breast densities, and so if you're training your mammograms only on like some specific subgroups, then they may not necessarily generalize to these other subgroups. So like when so yeah, so there's this limited data, and so like you want your model to be able to like really, even when there's limited data, be able to like really learn well. And so that like so these three are like maybe the main reasons why we need our models to be data efficient. And so the question we ask is like, can we build better AI models with less data? And the second part is, can we like build AI models that actually work for everyone? Like even when like say there may not be enough representative data types of those specific subgroups in our models, can it still work at the same level of performance as for the overall population? And so that's the question we asked ourselves in our team at Google, specifically in the case of these medical imaging models. And and like, I think maybe the first rule of talks is when you ask these questions, maybe the answer is yes. And so like we looked at this problem and figured out that there's actually plenty of ways in which we can improve our models and make them like really data efficient and work for everyone. And so, yeah, I guess I haven't like maybe been very technical so far. A lot of it might have seemed as PR for Google, but I think now I'm going to be switching tracks and be a little bit more technical and talk specifically about stuff I've done. And yeah, and feel free to ask any questions on any of these details later on in the Q&A. And so going a bit into details, right? And so how do we train these medical imaging models that we have? And so this is done by a process known as transfer learning. And so what you generally do is you first pre-train your models on this data set known as ImageNet. And this is basically a bunch of natural images of different classes that occur maybe naturally in the world. But actually, it's a whole lot of dogs. I think there are like probably 100 dog classes among like the 1,000 classes that you have in the ImageNet version. So that's basically how these models are pre-trained. And then what you do is you fine-tune it on your labeled medical images belonging to your target task, whether that's skin condition diagnosis, or whether that is chest X-ray interpretation, or whether that is like breast cancer detection from mammograms, right? And so yeah, so and so one thing that's very obvious is like the labeled medical images that we have access to is limited, and it's also super expensive. And then you can also see that like these images are visually very dissimilar from what we pre-train on. And so like natural images are very different from chest X-rays or mammograms, for example. And so the question that we ask is like, in order to maybe train better medical imaging models, we actually know that there's a lot of natural images in the world, right? I think so. And so the question is, why should we just only use this ImageNet dataset, which is only like 1 million images? And so that's what we end up doing. So basically what we do is, instead of pre-training only on this ImageNet dataset, which is like about 1 million images, we actually train it on all the visual data that we have possibly access, like have access to in the internet. So it's like web scale data and hundreds of billions. And so like Google can crawl them, and then like whatever is publicly accessible, we can like clean them up. And so Google internally has curated and like curated this internal data set known as JFE dataset. And that's like 300 million images. So it's like 300 times larger than what we have access to within the ImageNet dataset. And then what we do is we modify the process of transfer learning and use slightly new model architectures, and we call this process known as big transfer. And there is more details in the paper that's linked to over here. And then we then fine tune these models on our downstream medical imaging tasks, and whether that's skin condition diagnosis or chest X-ray interpretation or breast cancer detection from mammograms. And so it's essentially this is basically making a use of like huge internet scale data sets and large models. And when I say large models, it's like maybe 3 to 4 times bigger than what we are traditionally used to doing. And so yeah, the recipe is very simple. But what we ended up finding is that this is highly and this is also very simple to use. It's basically a drop-in replacement for existing like feature extraction backbones that we have. Like typically people tend to use these ResNet models. And basically you could take these bit models that are publicly available on GitHub, and you could drop in and then fine tune on your target task, and you could for free basically get huge improvements. And so we demonstrate these in mammography, dermatology, and chest X-ray interpretation, and we find that there's significant improvement in task performance. And then the second aspect that we found, which is like hugely encouraging for us, is we can reach the baseline performance using only 50% of the training data. So that's a pretty big win, right? And if you can reduce your data needs by using these freely available web-scale natural images to improve your medical imaging models, that's great. And so we conducted a bunch of similar experiments, and we wrote up this paper, which came on arXiv just a couple of weeks back. And if you're interested, feel free to check it out. It's called Supervised Transfer Learning at Scale for Medical Imaging. And then the second thing that we looked at was basically unlabeled medical images. So as I said, getting labeled medical images is expensive because you have to depend on expert clinicians, but there's quite a lot of unlabeled medical images that is available. And so what you can do is so there's been a lot of recent advancements in this field known as self and semi-supervised learning. And that basically makes use of unlabeled data and allows you to pre-train your models to high levels of accuracy. And so we piggyback on top of that and use the unlabeled medical images that we have access to pre-train our models. And then we fine-tune them on our target medical imaging tasks. And once again, what we find is like, so again, we wrote a paper about this, which also came out on arXiv a few weeks back, titled Big Self-Supervised Models Advanced Medical Imaging Classification. And so what we use over here is this process known as contrastive training. And so what this, and one specific thing that it relies on is augmentations, which are synthetically generated. So what you have is, if you have like an image, you don't need any labels over here, but you do computer vision transforms and like generate two different versions. Like it could be shifting, translation, rotation, like color jittering and stuff like that. So some things that are medically relevant. And then you basically ask the model to map these two different augmented versions of the same image to the same point in the representation space, and then like put everything else like that, put all of the image versions as like, to different parts of the representation space. And so that is basically the key idea of contrastive learning. It is quite simple, but as you can see, it relies on this process of augmentations. And what works for natural images, where this technique was first developed on, may not necessarily work for medical imaging, right? Because certain augmentations are not really medically relevant, and they don't necessarily let you learn more clinically relevant features. But the good thing is there's a lot of natural augmentations available in medical imaging data sets. For example, you have different views of your mammogram, so you have left and right eye fundus images, or in our dermatology data sets, we had like patients giving us multiple views of the same skin lesion. And so we use these natural augmentations, and we call this multi-instance contrastive learning, title MICLE. And we just use that instead of like generating these automatic augmentations. And so using these two approaches, we find that it's very beneficial for our downstream tasks that we considered. What we essentially find is like, if you're doing transfer learning for medical imaging, you might, and if you have access to unbuilt medical data, then you might be better off doing self-supervised pre-training rather than supervised pre-training, which is generally the norm. When I say supervised pre-training, it's models trained on ImageNet, and instead you're much better off like using this self-supervised pre-training approaches like Simpler over here. And so, yeah, this approach really improves our model performance on both dermatology and our chest X-ray interpretation tasks. And the other very interesting aspect is when we use these self-supervised learning approaches, we now find that we can actually reach the baseline level of model performance using only 20% of the label data. So it's almost like a 1/5 reduction in the amount of data that you need. And so these are actually big wins for us, because I think like the more and more we push our models to become more data efficient, I think that's going to further allow us to make faster progress in terms of deploying these models at scale. And so, yeah, if you're interested in more details, definitely check this paper out. So yeah, I think so. I covered like large natural image data sets. I covered unlabeled medical imaging data. Then the third question that we asked in our team was, can we actually generate synthetic data to augment our data sets and learn more efficiently? And as I said, I think this is inspired by the problem of like rare subgroups or rare conditions, right? So no matter what you do, if like a condition is rare or if a subgroup is rare, you're not going to have enough examples even in your large scale data sets or in your unlabeled medical images data sets. So if you're able to like synthetically generate them and use it to augment your downstream classifiers, that could possibly work. And so towards that, another paper that we had was using generative models, specifically GANs, to generate realistic synthetic rare dermatology data. So we use this model known as Pix2Pix, and what we do is we have this semantic map, which represents basically the skin color and the skin lesion, and we use these models and to be able to like translate them to, or translate or generate like an image in a skin color or of a given lesion for us. And so yeah, this turned out to be quite good. We basically asked dermatologists, we gave them a bunch of these different real and fake images for a given skin condition, and we basically asked them to pick out which one was real and which one was fake. And it turned out that these fake images were actually quite representative of some of the conditions that we have access to. And as you can see in the images over here, we're gradually varying the skin color, and you can see that sometimes these morphologies also change of the skin lesion, which is interesting because it turns out that the model's like learning, okay, some of these important aspects as well. And over here, we show that we are able to also vary the lesion size to generate these synthetic images. And so this is kind of very promising for us, because if we're able to do this, then we might be able to like generate more diverse data for some of our rare skin conditions and skin types, and augment the training data sets that we have access to, and like in turn like train better models for which can like perform better for some of these rare subgroups that we are doing. Yeah, and then the last question that we asked is, can we learn more efficiently from like fewer samples? Are there algorithmic innovations that we do? Because there's been plenty of progress on the AI research front in the computer vision field, specifically in these subfields known as few-shot learning and meta learning. And these methods generally tend to be benchmarked on these natural image data sets, and where like they tend to have these artificially curated distribution imbalances to test their methods, or like the experimental methodology is like not reflective of the real world. And so the question we ask is, does this translate to real world medical imaging data sets where these skewed distributions occur like very naturally, like in the sense that like conditions are rare or certain subgroups are rare? And so, yeah, we had another paper at this venue at Europe's called ML4H workshop, and this basically showed that maybe these methods are good, and if you combine them with your conventional supervised learning approaches, you might be able to like get these ensemble models that can perform better on these rare conditions. But on their own, I think we need a few more improvements in the research space in terms of these architectures or in terms of these algorithms to be able to like use on their own. But yeah, I think that's not a bad thing, in the sense that I think like all progress in research needs to be benchmarked on real world use cases, and then we can know okay, how far are we really making progress. So I think medical imaging in general is like very good tasks for like computer vision researchers, I think. And the good thing, at least within Google internally, is a lot more computer vision researchers want to evaluate their models on medical imaging data sets. And I think that's going to lead to a lot more progress, generally, not just within computer vision, but also for medical imaging. And that's going to also accelerate deployment. So yeah, switching tracks, I think the second thing that I highlighted was generalizability. And what I meant was we want our model's performance to be stable under distribution shifts when it encounters like new populations, new hospitals, and stuff like that. And so we had, and so we need our models to be like basically robust to these distribution shifts that you encounter in the real world. And towards that, we had a very giant collaboration with Google, a lot of different authors, as you can see, actually 40 authors, I believe. And we looked at like modern machine learning systems, and we probed this very specific aspect of modern machine learning, which is known as under specification. And we found that, yeah, this is actually quite a challenge that we need to solve going ahead. And so what do we mean by under specification? It's basically that if you have a machine learning pipeline which returns multiple models or predictors, as I maybe call in this slide, we say that your machine learning pipeline or workflow is underspecified if it can like return back to you multiple different distinct models that achieve the same IID evaluation performance, as in they perform equivalently on the test set that you have access to. So there's really no distinction between them. But it turns out that like this is a very real phenomenon that has not been explored before. It turns out that you can have models that like perform very similarly on your test set that you're using while developing your models, but vastly differ in real world performance. And to like showcase this better, we looked at two tasks, actually three different tasks, two in medical imaging and one in the EHR domain. And in the medical imaging domain, what we found is, like, for example, in the diabetic retinopathy models that we have, right? You have different camera types as you go from different countries. Like you have some camera types in the UK or the US, and then when you go to India, the quality sometimes goes below certain standards. And so you want your models to be able to like be stable when your camera quality degrades a little bit. But what we found that you can have models that perform very similarly on your test set that you have, but like they can differ very wildly when you give them like these different shifted distributions, which is the camera type over here. So it's very hard to diagnose this problem if you're just using one test set for your model. And another similar experiment is with your skin types, right? I think so. Your model can perform overall very equivalently on the different skin types that you have in aggregate in your test set. But if you probe a little bit and look at performance on these different subgroups or these different Fitzpatrick skin types, you can once again see very wildly different performance. And so this is this basically illustrates the challenge over here with modern machine learning. And another example that we had in the EHR domain was once again, we look at our test set performance, and then we one of the features that you have in your EHR is time of the day. And if we shifted the time of the day feature, and we found that the model performance drops. And then another shift that we introduced is the subset of lab orders that we include in our feature space. And then once again, we found that the model performance actually once again drops quite a lot. And so this is basically an indication that your model is actually relying on spurious correlations to make predictions. And so this is actually a consequence of underspecification, and this actually undermines real world deployment, because if that happens, you know that your model is not going to perform reliably in the real world when it's deployed in clinics. So what are the key takeaways over here? So this was basically a problems paper. It's not a solutions paper, so we don't have a grand solution. I think the entire community needs to come together to be able to solve this. So, but we want to be able to crisply define this problem, and I think this problem has real consequence, especially for deployment in medicine. And I think the one key thing is the choices that we often make for convenience when developing our medical imaging models. The models that we have over here are essentially just differing in the random seed that is being used to train these models. And but we can see that this choice, which is just made for convenience and made random, can really affect real world behavior. And so we need a lot more work in terms of like specifying and enforcing like very strong uh, like we need to have like very stronger tests. I don't think we can rely on tests that we use generally in machine learning, which is this IID notion that we have. I think we need like stronger domain specific tests where we vary the distributions, like shift the distributions and simulate them, and then like really robustly benchmark our models. And then the second thing that we need to do is like really incorporate a lot more domain knowledge to reduce underspecification in our models. And when I say domain knowledge, it means like say stuff derived from like knowledge derived from clinicians in terms of um, like say how certain conditions manifest in the real world, et cetera, et cetera. I think those are all those things that like can reduce or like can like maybe provide more information to the model. I think those can like make the model like be really more really better specified and perform more generally in the real world. And so yeah, that as I said, I think that was a problems paper, but we also found that there are actually some solutions to the generalization issue. And it turns out that the papers that I introduced to you before, large-scale pre-training and self-supervised learning, they actually turn out to be able to like actually make your models more robust as well. And so if you look at the supervised transfer learning at scale for medical imaging paper, we have a bunch of experiments where we shift the data sets for evaluation for each of the different tasks. So the mammo models are trained, the mammography models are trained on UK data sets, and we evaluate them on US data sets. And similarly, the chest X-ray models are trained on some hospitals, and then we evaluate it on a new data set called NIH. And similarly, for the dermatology data set, we use a data set coming from Australia, which has a bit different distribution of skin cancers, basically. And so we find that like when we use the large scale pre-trained models, they actually significantly improve in terms of performance in these shifted distributions. There's still a drop compared to your performance in your original test set, but it's much better than just say pre-training on ImageNet. So this is is a very promising sign for us in the sense that if large models are like more robust to some of these distribution shifts, that will help us in turn accelerate like real world deployment for some of these models. And similarly, the models that we trained using self-supervised learning, we also found that they were also super robust to some of the shifted distributions that we have. And so, yeah, definitely check out the details in the paper if you are interested over here. And then the third thing that I mentioned is safety. And we really want our models to be able to like call out when they don't know something, right? And so in that case, we can like invoke the clinician in the loop, or like just tell the consumer, okay, or the patient that I'm uncertain, please go consult a doctor. And so one of the important problems in this space from a machine learning perspective is out of distribution detection. And this is, I think, one of the most important problems in medical AI safety. And what this problem essentially is for a model to be able to recognize when an input at test time, when the model is being deployed, is different from what it is trained on. So it's basically saying that I have read all these books, and like if you're presented with like a paragraph from a different book, you should be able to flag that and say that, okay, I haven't studied this before and I don't know, so you probably should refer to an expert. And so this is essentially this task. And so this is also another area that we focus a lot on within Google. And we had this paper that we collaborated with a bunch of DeepMind folks as well. And so one of the approaches that we tried over here was using this contrastive training that I introduced in some of the slides before. And we evaluated and we used this and evaluated it for the task of out of distribution detection. And just to go maybe a little bit more into the technical machine learning details over here. So if you were to like naively train your models using just supervised learning, there's no there's maybe not enough incentive for the model to like keep all the information that it has access to. So what I mean over here specifically, you have these two classes, class 1 and class 2, and then you have this out of distribution class. To be able to be able to detect this out of distribution class, you need to preserve the information of this X2 dimension, right? But if you have a model that's purely trained using supervised learning, it has no incentive to like preserve the information of this X2 dimension. And so but then when you use contrastive training, we found that there's more incentive for the model to preserve this information, and this in turn enables it to better distinguish this out of distribution class that it has access to. And so this is basically the key idea that is illustrated using this toy problem. And just to maybe go a little bit more into the details of the model. So the models are generally trained using the supervised loss. And in addition, we also train the models using this contrastive loss in this multitask setting. And so it's not very different from what you saw a couple of slides before. And it turns out that when we benchmark these models on and look at the out of distribution detection performance, and so there's a spectrum of out of distribution detection, right? So you could have something like that is very close to your training distribution. And so that means basically when you have the same condition in your fundus or in your eyes, but the camera type changes. Or you maybe have just a different view of your mammogram. So, but the fact remains that you have not seen that before, so it should still be out of distribution. So that's something that we call near OOD. And then far OOD is basically you have medical images on one hand and you have natural images like a cat on the other hand. So your model should be able to like distinguish both and be able to like call out both these examples, right? So you don't want like when you have a breast cancer detection model and given a cat image and it says cancer or something like that, that'll be terrible for the field as a whole. And so, so far OOD is important, but near OOD is also important because it's more subtle, and that's what you're going to encounter a lot more in real world clinical practice. And so what we found out, and so generally what happens is like a lot of the machine learning researchers in the OOD detection field generally focus on this far OOD task, and they came up with a lot of different methods. But it turns out that these methods tend to maybe drop in performance when you just look at near OOD. So we look at this entire spectrum, and we found that our method that we propose over here is actually the best across this whole spectrum. And so this is a nice win for us. And so if you want more details over here, please check out this paper. But there's obviously a lot more to be said about medical AI safety, and like, yeah, stay tuned for more research updates from us on this front as well. And then the last thing is regarding fairness. And what I mean by that is we want our models to be unbiased and perform equally across different subgroups that we have in our, like that they encounter in the wild when they're deployed. And so there's a lot to be said and done over here, and we just about scratching the surface, to be honest. But one thing that I just want to say is if you're like developing medical imaging models, be sure to have like algorithmic fairness considerations as like a key axis of evaluation. And so like going ahead, I think one of the things that we really will focus on doing is like anytime we develop a new model, we will definitely have like a fairness evaluation to ensure that like we are not like, you know, making worse some of the health equity issues that we have, and like be as fair as possible. And so, and just as an example, in for the supervised transfer learning paper that I just introduced, we had this fairness evaluation where we peeked under the hood a little bit, looked at the model performance in different subgroups, and what we found out that is essentially that when you use this large-scale supervised pre-training approach, so, and generally there have been concerns, right? I think we have this OpenAI GPT-3 models, and people feel that like when you train on these large-scale data sets, there's the possibility to like make them even more biased than when you're using these small-scale data sets. But what we found out that when we look at the relative deviation from the mean performance for these different subgroups, we found that these large-scale models are actually much better. And so if you look at green there and lower is better over here, they tend to be much better than the ones that are just pre-trained using ImageNet pre-training. So yeah, there's a lot more to be said and done over here. But yeah, just if you have like one thing from these set of slides, it's just that if you're like developing any models in this space, be sure to like look at fairness more closely. And so yeah, coming to the end of the talk a little bit. And so like, what are the key takeaways? I think I maybe presented a bunch of different things. And so what we have is, I think we have made significant progress in AI in medical imaging and AI in medicine in general. But it remains that we are yet to see real world patient impact of AI at scale. And while there are many different aspects of the overall ecosystem in terms of like how we can like more, how we can make the models more efficient, effectively collaborate with clinicians, understand patients, etc. The AI models themselves, I think we need to like make them better to be able to like safely deploy at scale. And when I say better, I think what I essentially mean is like they need to be more data efficient, more generalizable, safe, and fair. But like what's promising is there have been like several recent advancements like large scale pre-training, self-supervised learning, generative models, and many other algorithm advancements that I briefly talked about. And then it basically suggests to me that like we have all the pieces to crack the puzzle. And so I am definitely optimistic that the future where AI has significant clinical impact at scale is not far off. The future is definitely looking bright. But yeah, there's still some work to be done. And so if you have more questions, feel free to reach out to me at natweb@google.com or connect with me at Twitter at Vivnat. Or if you just want to maybe just discuss medical AI research in general, I'll be happy to. And I want to especially thank my teammates. I mean, really, these are really my teammates. I mean, they're like superstars. But specifically, these are them. There's a bunch of different, like at Google, you have access to like amazing, a lot of different smart people from with different backgrounds. And so it's one of the perks of working at Google. And yeah, it's been fun collaborating with all of them across these a bunch of different projects that we are working on. And lastly, thank you to you all for like patiently listening. I've been like jumping through slides, but happy to take more questions right now in the remaining time or even offline. Thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Vivek. That was very detailed and very interesting. We have a couple of questions. I can read them out to you, and if you could answer them, that would be great. So the first one is, would the smaller amount of data sets impact reliability, even though they do increase efficiency?
Yeah, that is a good question. I think, yeah, there is a possibility that like when you're training these models on small data sets, they may be not generalizable. So yeah, you have to do your appropriate evaluations. But the goal is, yeah, I think you want, even if you have just one sample of like a particular subgroup, you want to be able to like efficiently extrapolate from that one sample and have like a very decent picture of what the overall population looks like. Or if you say, if you're not able to like learn very effectively from that one sample, you should be able to like flag and say, okay, I don't know this. There's not enough information for me. And so I think you have to do your evaluations properly. So there's this possibility, but I think, I think there's a certain minimum amount of samples that you need to be able to do reliably. So I think there is definitely that aspect that we keep in mind. So if you go below that, I think you need to be able to like flag and just say, I don't know. So that's it.
Okay, excellent. Just continuing from that, there's a question: how long does it actually take to make a machine learning model versus curating the data?
I think the model itself is probably 10% or even like 5% of the work. I think curating the data, at least right now, is almost 90% of the work. And as you can imagine, it's even like hard in machine learning where there are always these privacy considerations, etc. And so like you have to talk to partner institutions, and they should be they have all these privacy considerations and IRBs and everything that come into the board. And so that happens, and that itself takes like many months, involves like business development and legal folks. And then once that data comes in-house, you have to like get them labeled, at least a significant fraction of it. And so that can again take many months because you need expert clinicians, right? So yeah, I think 90% of, I wouldn't be too far off if I say like 90% of the time is like in terms of spent in terms of curating the data set. The model development is much easier. I think like all these tools like TensorFlow, PyTorch have like made like really democratized model development. And like, for example, Colab and like stuff that you have access through Google Cloud or from like AWS and stuff like that. That just made it much more easier for us. So yeah, focus on the data.
Okay, but very long time for that then. So next we have one from an engineer. He says, do you actually need a PhD to go into AI research and development? Or would you need a PhD to boost your chances of doing that kind of job?
I myself don't have a PhD, although I think I was lucky in terms of the time that I got into this field, which was very early in 2013 when this field was just taking off. But I have a lot of colleagues who don't have a PhD, and they're all superstars. I think PhD gives you the rigor in terms of like really being able to like deeply understand a problem, but I think you can develop that offline as well. And sometimes when you're not doing a PhD, like when you're doing a PhD, there's this possibility that you just become too isolated from the real world, and so you can like end up like making progress, but that progress is not really tied to like real world impact. And but then on the other hand, when you're working on these applied problems in medical imaging or in self-driving cars, where we are like really tied to the product, then like the progress, like you're able to like clearly see whether you're making progress or not. So I think it's more, yeah, you don't need. So the long answer is I don't think you need PhDs. I think, and I think deep learning is one of the easiest fields. In fact, personally, I feel like to be able to like get into, because of the amount of tools that we have to, and the amount of knowledge and resources that like regularly gets put out in this community. The community is like really open.
Okay, brilliant. Next is, have any of the models been deployed into clinics? So your clinical models. If yes, what were the results and the feedback from the clinicians?
Yes. So yeah, I think one of the papers that I talked about, right, I think like early on was about like deploying the diabetic retinopathy models in clinics in Thailand. So those models are actually screening patients every day right now in Thailand and India. But like as that paper outlines, like the model performance like on your test set is not reflective of the real world. And so there's the second phase that generally doesn't happen in traditional AI research, but that is like really understanding the clinical workflows and everything, and that takes time to like understand. So you need these reader studies, as we call them, both like on with retrospective data and also with like prospective data, like or trials or whatever that you want to call it. And so yes, so we have these models deployed in clinics, and some of them are working really well, but I think generally we also need to generally improve. I think we're learning a lot along the way as well. So, but I think I'm very optimistic that in a few more years we'll see a lot more of them. Really, like almost all these papers that I talked about, I think they'll all be deployed in some form or another.
Yeah, all of the papers that you spoke about were really interesting. I'll look them up later. But regarding any of those products, have they been CE or FDA approved?
Almost all of them are going through these regulatory processes. Yeah, I think in the next year, like we'll probably have like at least for the DR models, the diabetic retinopathy models, and the breast cancer models, we have some form of CE or FDA approvals, and similarly for the dermatology models. So yeah, I think that's also a big step, right? I think so. You have model development in your lab. You have like these retrospective and prospective studies, and then you have this regulation, and then once you have them all, then you deploy. And so so for all these papers, I think we're well past the research phase. We are in the regulation phase, and so maybe in the next year or two, you will see them like deployed in real world clinics, or maybe even in apps like directly going to consumers. So.
Would there be like a specific reason why they wouldn't be approved?
It's a good question. So as I said, I think like like there is. So I think my biggest concern is I feel like like these models are maybe not robust enough or not safe enough to be deployed, and that's something that keeps me awake at night. Like we generally have access to limited amounts of data, and we evaluate on that, and we kind of have to extrapolate the performance in the real world from that. And so there's a very real possibility of like models making wrong decisions, and that in turn causing patient harm. And so being able to like build all these life safeguards and like improving our models to not be able to do that. And so, and then the other aspect is, I feel like even the regulation that is coming up in this space, it's also all very like recent. And so like obviously a lot of people are thinking about this, but there's a lot more needs to be said and done over here. And so like before we do this full loop deploy at scale and like get feedback, we may not even be able to know, okay, what are the full set of things that we need to be able to do. So it's an iterative process, but like, yeah, we can't rush too much over here. I think you have to be like really careful because of the potential harm.
Yeah, exactly. You need to be safe. The next one's by Liam Chalcroft. I mean, what's Liam's here? I mean, Liam's written an excellent article on the MedTech website, on the MedTech portal. So if anyone would like to check it out, definitely go and read it. It's brilliant. He's asked, can you see visual transformers being usable for image tasks in medical imaging with the resources you have for training? Example, BIT. BIP.
Yeah, for sure. I think there was this one newsletter that came out maybe in the last week showing like the number of different applications of transformers in general, all the way from like in AI for music to like poetry generation to like, yeah, a bunch of different tasks. And I think medical imaging is no different. The good thing about transformers is they allow you to do this multimodal learning because the same architecture or the building block can be used for both text and images and for structured data. And I can't imagine a future where like a medical imaging model just uses the images. It will also be using structured data, metadata, or EHR notes or whatever that it has access to, and like clinician notes, for example, and be able to learn off that. And to be able to like learn efficiently off that, I think these transformer models are going to be the key to be able to unlock that. So I think that's definitely exciting. And I think this, yeah, I think you're going to be definitely seeing work over there.
Excellent. The next one's quite interesting. It says, are there any red lines for AI that remains a black box being deployed into medical care clinical environment? Or if it can be deployed, and is it economic, should it be deployed?
Yeah, I think it's a good question. And maybe there's not a right answer to it as well. If your model performs really, really well, but you're not able to explain it, would you still use it? I think that's an open question, right? I think, like, yeah, I don't necessarily have the right answer to it. I would still want to be able to like develop these models that can be like reasonably explain why they are making these decisions. And so that is kind of the goal. And I actually don't see a future where we are not able to like improve further on this explainability or interpretability aspect. I think we like with so much talent and like so much interest in this field, I think we're not far away from making like real breakthroughs over here. So I don't think we'll necessarily hit this point. I think by the time like we get these models through regulation and everything, I think the AI research will actually progress much more. That we'll be able to like give like granular reasons for why models are making decisions. So, but having said that, I think it's a very difficult question. I mean, if you're in like if you end up in a place where you have to choose between the two, I don't know if I have the right answer at this point of time. And sorry, what was the second one?
Should it be deployed if it isn't suitable?
Yeah, I think my personal answer over here is no, but I think there may be others who have different opinions. So.
Okay. So the next one's relating to the ImageNet models. So they were trained on 2D data. Could it be transferred to 3D medical data as well?
We have, yeah, they were like in the same way for some of the 3D tasks as well. That I outlined. I think the lung CT and the 3D OCT papers are all like in the 3D modality. So yeah. So there's an easy way to like convert it into 3D, and there's a hard way. The easy way actually works pretty well. So I don't think you need anything sophisticated on that front. So yeah, the short answer is yes. I think they can work really well for 3D also.
Okay, excellent. I know we've gone over the time, but do you have time for a couple more questions?
Yeah, I'm happy to answer.
Okay, so this one's from Suraj. As a researcher, I would like to know what the outlook for applying transfer learning to rare diseases is, and how to tackle training at scale in such heterogeneous conditions.
So yeah, as I said, I think transfer learning is actually quite promising in the sense that it can, some of the recent advances that we have, I think they can all reduce the amount of data that you need overall, and also for some of the specific cases where maybe you don't have enough data. So I would say it's very promising, but then there's also these other specific things that you could do, like you can make your architectures, like convert your architectures and make them be able to like really well learn really well from like small samples. And so there's one bunch of this work done in this field known as few-shot learning. And then there are fields like meta learning, for example, where the overall learning process is modified to be able to like learn from a few samples. So I think so it's not just maybe transfer learning, but also like some of these other advancements as well that can be combined to like, be really effective for learning from small number of samples for these rare conditions or rare subgroups. Yeah. I would say, yeah, just look at all of them. But transfer learning on its own is also going to be like super helpful.
Okay, excellent. So I think to finish off, this is quite a nice question from Faye. Where do you see yourself in 5 years' time, and what do you hope to achieve by then?
That's a great question. I mean, I would really want to have like a lot of these models, and there are many more that we have internally within a pipeline, being deployed in real world clinics and like really improving patient outcomes. That is for sure. But then there's also this aspect that like I think right now a lot of medical AI research happens on the at places like Google or like MIT or like maybe Oxford or stuff like that. So like the very small communities have access to medical data in terms to like train these models and being able to deploy them. So I think there's this aspect of like also being able to like democratize this a little bit more, build a platform which is like maybe like respects privacy of patients, but also like gives access to a lot more people to be able to like build, deploy models and like get like regulatory approvals. And so I think that's the bigger challenge, because if like say Google or like maybe some academic institutions are the only people doing this, then it's going to be like many decades before we're going to like be able to like realize the impact of the usefulness of AI in the setting. And so we really need to be able to like be able to democratize this a little bit more, and so ensure that like like developers or like ML modelers in like Kenya or India or like like in all parts of the world basically are able to do this for their respective countries, for their hospitals or like people over there. And so I think that's the bigger challenge, and like being able to solve that and like being able to like put together a platform where that can happen is, I think, like I'm more excited about that. In fact, I think like if that happens, I think then we'll like maybe within like 10 years we are going to be able to see like AI like super dominant and like really improving patient outcomes.
Okay, excellent. That's definitely something to look forward to in the future. It's very exciting as well. So we've come to the end of the talk. I'd like to thank you for coming and giving up your time to talk to all of us today. It's been very interesting, and hopefully next year, if you're in London, we'd love to have you in person for the event in London. Yeah, for all of the attendees, I'd like to say we've got 2 more talks tomorrow. There's one from Eric Topol and Siddhartha Chaturvedi from Microsoft. So join us tomorrow at 6. Excellent. Have a lovely evening, everyone.
Yeah, and thank you so much everyone for listening. And yeah, definitely if you have any more questions, I think feel free to reach out to me. And thank you so much to you, Neil, and all the organizers for putting together such an excellent event. I'm looking forward to being back over here next year. Take care, everyone.
Thank you. Neil's done an amazing job of getting you in. That's great.
For sure. Bye-bye.
Bye.